It is common knowledge that the Quran and the Hadith are held up as authorities in Islam and by Muslims. But did you know that there is a group of scholars, group of people who are knowledgeable about Sharia that have absolute authority over Muslims? And we will reveal them to you in this episode. Well, hello everyone. This is Fadi, and I want to welcome you back to a continuation of this fascinating series about Sharia law, which we called Sharia Law, the Islamic Talmud. And with me here, in virtually, if you wish, our dear brother Lloyd De Jongh, to continue to unpack to us the topic of Sharia law and its complexity, but in a way that makes perfect sense to at least the normal person on the street that doesn't really understand Sharia law, or maybe better yet, doesn't know where to go to find sources concerning Sharia law, which, by the way, reminds me to let you know that usually every one of these videos will have the proper links to this research and other external sources. So please make sure you check the description box to be able to access those particular resources. Now, today's episode, we are going to title it The Authority of the Scholars. The Authority of the Scholars. And of course, our dear brother Lloyd De Jongh is the one that will help us here begin to explore that. Lloyd, thank you so much as always for being here. And we're so thankful really for you to take the time to join us. And at the same time, for the research that you've done. And I remember you, the first episode, telling us that really, to your knowledge, and I would confirm that, I'm not aware of anyone who have gone to this depth in doing topics about Sharia law, at least in the English channels. So we're thankful that the Lord put this on your heart, and we're praying that many will benefit from this, both Muslims and non-Muslims. So welcome, brother.
Well, thank you very much, Al-Fadi. I'm very, very honored to be here with you again.
Thank you. So what is it about the authority of the scholars that you would like to discuss? And I know you touched on this in the past, but I'm sure this time you're going to dig a little bit deeper on that.
Yeah. So I just want to wrap up on the topic. The scholars of Islam have inherited essentially the mantle of authority from Muhammad, and they speak with the authority of Muhammad. And thus, it is obligatory to obey the scholars. And if one does not obey the scholars, one becomes a murtad. You have committed a crime, which we know what the standard penalty is within Islam. So the scholars have an incredible degree of authority, and we'll look at that today.
Very good. So what can we take a look at the moment?
So we'll go back to the Reliance of the Traveler as my major resource, as well as the Encyclopaedia of Islam. So if we go to my slides, then I can just refresh the audience on one or two items, and we'll wrap up this section.
Very good. Please take us to that slide.
All right. So taqlid or taqlid, we've mentioned this before. This is Muslims say we hear and obey. Now, I have here ijtihad, literally effort in law, the use of individual reasoning, exerting oneself to form an opinion in a case or as to a rule of law. Now, of course, ijtihad is reserved for only the imams, the four imams. Mm-hmm. Now, ijtihad is achieved by applying analogy to the Quran and the custom of the Prophet. So one has to reuse effectively the use of reason, but reason within the confines of the Sharia. Now, the opposite of ijtihad is called taqlid, the unquestioning acceptance of the doctrines of the established schools and the authorities being the imams. So lay Muslims may not utilize ijtihad. They have to simply hear and obey, listen and obey, just follow, effectively do what they are told. So ijtihad is thinking is effectively the domain of the scholars, and just listening and following and obeying is the domain of the lay Muslim. Taqlid, imitation in law, the unquestioning acceptance of the doctrines of established schools and authorities. And a person who must do so is called a muqallid. And in theology, it is the imitation of the Prophet, of his companions, and their pious successors. So in other words, one must imitate Muhammad. And we know what Muhammad's, shall we say, moral record or immoral record is like. And yet one has to imitate him in all things. And one cannot blame him, or one cannot find him guilty or think negatively of him. So we've discussed the ijma before, the Islamic consensus as to what the interpretation of the Quran and the other sources are. And with consensus came an obligation to join a school. And despite the rule of taqlid, innovation or bid'ah still occurred. Schools competed. And of course, we know which 4 major schools won. Now, a mufti, some people may not know, is a scholar who gives a non-binding fatwa, whereas the binding fatwa are found within the ijma, within the Sharia. Now, a mufti is the person who gives an opinion on a point of law, a fatwa, always engaged in that profession. A fatwa in law is an opinion on a point of law, but again, it's non-binding unless it is in the Sharia. If it is the word of Muhammad or the word of Allah, then it is permanently binding. Now, Muslims always ask us, have you consulted a scholar? Well, let's look at Sheikh Al-Albani. He says, Allah the Wise has divided the Muslim community into 2 types of people, the al-dhikr, the elect, and those that depend on the al-dhikr. So in other words, there are those who are the elect who tell you what to do, and there are those who just listen, which reinforces the point that I've just been making, right? And of course, he says, Allah says to ordinary people, ask those who possess the message if you do not know. So this is basically the Sharia interpretation of this Quranic verse, Quran 21:7 and Quran 16:43. So now the al-dhikr are, as we all know, right, are the people of the Quran and the people of the Hadith, those who know the authentic from the unauthentic and the general from the specific, and the abrogating from the abrogated, and other principles of fiqh and Hadith. So it's interesting that the scholars and within the Sharia manuals and the 4 imams will routinely talk about what is abrogated, yet lay Muslims will deny there is abrogation. But of course, one of the jobs of the scholars are to know what is abrogated and what has abrogated that thing. So we've discussed previously mantuk and mafhum. This is 2 kinds of abrogation that very few people know about. But for instance, if a line in the Quran says that all cows are brown, right? What that line could mean is not what it says, but what it means is that all cows can come in many shades, including ice cream colored, bubblegum colored, and pink with blue spots. Right. So the mantuk is the literal meaning that you see on the page. The mafhum is how it is interpreted. So sometimes what you read is not what it says. If people understand that point. Does that make sense, Al-Fadi?
Absolutely. So, I mean, whatever you read, which is mantuq, may not really mean what you think. That's where you rely on the scholars to explain that meaning to you.
Yes, so it could say that Allah only likes chocolate ice cream, but the mafhum says Allah likes raspberry, coconut, and pineapple ice cream as well as chocolate. You see, so what the line says is not necessarily at all how it is interpreted, because there are other sources that add to that, and the scholars have to know this, and this causes massive confusion. All right, so I will skip this. And also in the Shema, we have the concept of we hear and obey. So this is obviously, there's a parallel, an echo within the Shema, right? And this, of course, comes from the Quran. The only statement of the true believers when they're called to Allah and His Messenger to judge between them is that they say, we hear and we obey. And those are the successful. And the scholars are the ones who tell you what to think. They tell you how to interpret all of this. That interpretation is not left to the lay Muslim. Now, we've discussed this before. I'm not going to go over this again, but as I've mentioned before, there are 2 divisions and 4 levels within Islam. So that's just to remind people, please look at some of the earlier shows. And let's look at Sunnah, Creed, Hadith to law. So the Sunnah formed into the Creed. The Creed was absorbed into the Hadith, and the Hadith, and all of these was entered into law. So the scholars of the first generation who preceded us and those after them among these successors, the people of virtue, tradition, understanding, and insight, they are not mentioned, but in a gracious way. So you cannot criticize the scholars. You cannot criticize those who came before, because they are the ones who most perfectly understood, and also who understood the will of Allah, the will of Muhammad, but also who created all the sources that Muslims follow today. And notice the scholars are the inheritors of the prophets. So they leave behind knowledge. And whoever has that knowledge has an abundant share. So these scholars today even are the inheritors of the prophets, and they must be respected. So if we have time, otherwise in the next section, I will talk about the authority of the scholars. And this would be in the Reliance of the Traveler. So For those who have the time and download the book, The Reliance, they can look at pages 15 to 23 and 33 to 41. I will briefly look into that in the time that we have. I'll go to page 15. So, the obligatoriness of following qualified scholarship. This is The Reliance of the Traveler, the world's most popular, most well-known, most common Islamic law manual. The mujtahid's opinion is evidence to non-specialists, and the Sharia quite bluntly says that lay Muslims, their opinion has no weight. Scholarly consensus is legally binding. One may not follow other than the four schools. And it is, they mention here, proof that it is legally valid and even obligatory to accept the authority of qualified scholarship. And they mention here taqlid. So if you are not capable of issuing expert legal opinion, then you must go to the scholars. That's why Muslims will always say, have you consulted a scholar? Right. So I'll pause here for the moment, Al-Fadi. Your thoughts, I'll leave it up to you.
That's wonderful, and we will come back and revisit this next episode because we want to help people understand the importance of that. And at some point, Lloyd, whether next episode or before you close this particular part of our series, we need to address if there is any contradictions between these schools. In other words, a follower of one school could accuse another follower of another school of being heretical or not follower of true Islam. If you can touch on that, that would be great.
Will do. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. And thank you, everyone, for joining us for this amazing and fabulous series called Sharia Law, the Islamic Talmud. Today, we talked about the authority of the scholars, and we will continue with this comparison next time. Until then, have a blessed day. Thank you for watching this video. Be sure to like and subscribe to our channel, CIRA International, and click on the bell so that you receive notifications whenever we publish a new video or go live. I would also like to appeal to you to consider becoming a Patreon patron by clicking the link right below. By doing so, you can give towards the production of these videos. There are also other options for you where you can give to our channel. I thank you from the bottom of my heart.